In the previous video, you saw how we make gametes via meiosis, but basically whenever we see meiosis done, we're seeing male gametes being made. We're seeing how we make sperm. And the thing is that male and female gametes are produced in slightly different ways. So the question is, how do you distinguish a male from a female? And you might be thinking, well, duh, that's easy. But in some organisms, it's a little more difficult, right? You can't just look at an organism and tell if it's a male or a female. So how do you tell? Well, the way you tell is actually by the gamete that they make. So the definition of a male versus female is always the same. Females produce the larger gamete, and males produce the smaller, more motile or mobile gamete. So, yeah, we can look in humans and say, well, yeah, I can tell male from female. However, the way we can tell as far as their gametes go, we define male and female as far as sex, biological sex, with what gametes are being produced. And so the large gamete, the egg, is female, and the sperm, the one that can move, is the male. And I don't know if you're aware of this, sperm can move, but they're not really great at it. They can only really swim in and turn in one direction. They can't really decide which direction they're going. They just go. So that's why so many of them need to be produced. Eggs, on the other hand, how many eggs does a woman produce every month, do you think? It's basically one. It's rare that more than one egg is going to be produced in a month. And there's a reason for that. It's how the eggs are produced. So let's take a look. So in males, when sperm are produced, it's produced just how we saw before, right? So, you've got your starting gamete, you divide, you get 2 equal size gametes, and then you divide again, and you get 4 sperm. All right, so every time you do mitosis to make sperm, or what we call spermogenesis, you're going to get 4 sperm. However, in female animals, that's not what happens. Every time we do and you don't need to know the name, but it's called oogenesis, to make an oocyte or an egg, we're going to do it a little differently. So you're going to start with the diploid female egg cell, the ones that generate the eggs, and they're going to undergo meiosis 1, just like you saw in the video, and they're going to divide up the genetic information, but something's going to happen at cytokinesis. Instead of dividing evenly, you can see they're not going to divide evenly. One of them is going to divide as very small. It's basically going to just contain the genetic information. It's just going to contain the nucleus. And it's going to be what we call a polar body. That is not going to divide anymore. You can see it's going to stop. The other half, though, is going to keep going. Pretty much all of the cytoplasm and cell parts are here. This is going to undergo meiosis 2. And the same thing's going to happen. In telophase, you're going to get the pieces, the material divided up, but it's not going to be even. So you're going to get the nucleus in one side with not really anything else, and all the other stuff with the nucleus on the other side. And same thing's going to happen. This is going to be destroyed, and this one is going to be the one that becomes the functional gamete, or the egg. Okay, so what we end up with is one large egg, and then these two polar bodies that get broken down pretty much immediately, and the materials are recycled. So very different way to produce gametes. So female animals produce one egg every time they undergo meiosis. However, male animals, every time they do meiosis, they're going to produce 4 sperm. But they need to produce a lot more of them in order for sexual reproduction to work. All right, so I have a question. Sexual reproduction in seahorses results in the male becoming pregnant. I don't know if you know that, but why is he not considered a female? Knowing what you've just learned. So the male does become pregnant, and the male does carry the offspring until they're born. And the answer here is A. Even though he's the one that becomes pregnant, he still makes the smaller of the 2 types of gametes. He still makes the sperm. The way the male in seahorses becomes pregnant is the female transfers her eggs over to the male into his pouch, and then he fertilizes them and carries them around. Okay. All right. So I just want to point out again that meiosis creates that variation, and there's a couple ways that that happens. One is that crossing over that was pointed out in the video. So you get crossing over during prophase 1, and this might be a little easier to see. So those homologous chromosome sets line up together. So, you know, chromosome 1 and chromosome 1 line up. They exchange genetic information, and now they've each got a little bit of each other's genetic information, so that once they get divided out into their sperm or egg cells, for example, if this is 4 different sperm, they're all going to be genetically different. All right. That's not the only thing, though, that creates that genetic variation. So you've also got genetic variation because you've got information coming from 2 parents, right? So each parent is going to be giving genetic information. You've got crossing over. And then the other thing that you saw in the video, and that is that random assortment. So when the chromosomes line up, the homologous chromosomes line up for metaphase, in metaphase 1, they line up randomly. So it's not that all of the chromosomes that you inherited from your mom are on one side and all from your dad on the other. They line up however they get there. And so you get a mixture of them going to each cell. Okay. So question is, what are the costs and benefits of sexual reproduction? Because a lot of organisms reproduce using sexual reproduction, using meiosis. And so what is the benefit of using sexual reproduction? We'll start with that one. What's the benefit? What's the upside, or what are the benefits? Because there's obviously more than one possibility. So what are the benefits of using sexual reproduction? Okay. And my guess is that most of you said genetic variation, right? You can get so much genetic variation here. However, if you think about it, bacteria reproduce asexually, right? And bacteria are successful. They're everywhere. While most of the plants and animals reproduce sexually. So which is the better method? So let's think about it. And I'm going to warn you, there is a spider on the next slide. I won't stay on it for very long. So what are some sexual reproduction disadvantages? What are some of the costs of reproducing using sexual reproduction? So I'll just forward over here. I wanted to put that slide up because it might give you a hint. So what are some of the disadvantages of using sexual reproduction? All right. So I don't know if you came up with this one. This one rarely actually comes up. But if you think about it, if you're using sexual reproduction, only half of your genetic information gets passed on, right? If you're using asexual reproduction, all of your genetic material gets passed on because you're making a copy of yourself, right? So that is a disadvantage. It takes time and energy to find partners, right? Yeah. In order to do sexual reproduction, you have to have another organism. So you have to go, you have to find and woo them, or, you know, whatever is going on for that organism. It can be risky. So that's part of why I put that spider slide up there, whether it's risky because your mate might eat you. So I don't know if you recognize that's a black widow spider. Black widows generally eat the male. The female eats the male after mating. But the other thing is if you're mating, you know, you're working on sexual reproduction, you're not always paying attention to what's going on. So you may make yourself vulnerable to predation or disease or anything else that might occur, right? So you do run that risk. And then there's also more opportunities for mistakes. Using meiosis allows for more chromosome disorders because there's more ways for the dividing up of the genetic material, those chromosomes, to go wrong. And we'll see that later on. So there's just a lot more opportunity for problems to occur. So what would then be advantages of asexual reproduction? Well, they're pretty much reversed, right? Because you don't get any of the benefits of sexual reproduction as far as like genetic variation and so forth when you do asexual reproduction, but you get to divide incredibly fast. All right. So here, this is showing you the bacterial growth population of E. coli. So we've got some E. coli bacteria over here. So the population starts really small. And then you can see this is every 20 minutes. So every 20 minutes, the bacteria here are dividing. And after 180 minutes, we have gone from a couple hundred bacteria to 5,000 bacteria. You know, a sexually reproducing organism can't do that. The downside to asexual reproduction is you're making copies of yourself. And so while that works really well when the environment is perfect, if the environment is changing, it doesn't work so well, right? Because you're just basically copies of yourself over and over and over again. So if the environment's changing, sexual reproduction, because you have that genetic variation going on, even though it takes some more time, you have that ability for genetic variation. If your environment's pretty stable, then asexual reproduction can work really well. Now you might be thinking, yeah, but bacteria have been around for a long time and there are tons of them. We'll talk about how they get around that problem of genetic variation when we get to the microbes chapter. All right, and I have one more question for you. So if an organism lives in an environment that's variable, so things are changing, it's most likely going to use what kind of reproduction via the process of blank? And in this case, if the environment is changing, the better option is to use sexual reproduction via meiosis. If the environment is not changing, then it would use asexual reproduction via mitosis or binary fission, depending on the organism, right? Mitosis if it's eukaryotic, binary fission if it's a prokaryotic organism, all right?